everyone, you're welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be making tutorial on how to make this beautiful dress, and this is going to be the top part of this tutorial. If you have not watched the first two, please kindly go ahead and watch it. I've posted earlier this week. Alright, so for this tutorial today, you're going to be needing 3.5 yards of Ankara fabric altogether. So for the grey one, I used 2 yards. The white one, I used 1.5. Then you'll be needing a matching lining and also a matching thread, and also you'll be needing some interfacing and as well as wadding to pad the bust area.
We are going to be drafting it on the lining first. Then when we are done, we're going to be using it to cut out the main fabric. So I'm going to be cutting the front part of the upper bodice first. My fabric is folded into 2, and I've also fused the lining with my interfacing. So I'll start by drawing my guideline. Then after that I'm going to measure down all my vertical measurements. So first I'll measure down the length of my armhole, my nipple point, my under bust, my waist length, and 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then I will extend the lines. So this guideline is going to serve as your shoulder. This is my armhole length, which is going to be your chest line. This is my nipple point, my under bust, my waist length, and 1/2 inch seam allowance. So the next I'm going to do now, on the guideline, I'm going to input my shoulder measurement divided by 2. My shoulder is 16 divided by 2. That will be 8 inches. I'll measure 8 inches like this, and I'll rule it straight down to the chest line. So starting from this point here, I'm going to measure 3 inches like this. Then I'll come to the tip of the shoulder. I'll drop it by 1. Then I'll connect the points together. That is your shoulder slope. Then I'll add 1/2 inch to this line for my shoulder seam allowance. Next thing I'm going to do now is to input all my measurements. So I'll come to the chest line. I will input my bust circumference measurement divided by 4. My bust is 40 divided by 4. That will be 10. Then I'll come to the waistline. I will input my waist circumference measurement divided by 4. My waist is 32 divided by 4. That will be 8 inches. Then I'll connect the points together. Do now is to come to this point. I'll measure from this shoulder drop to the chest line, and I'll locate the center. Then I'll come in at that point by 1/2 inch this way. Then I'll blend it back to the shoulder tip. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to input my dart. So I'll come to my nipple point line. This is my nipple point. I will input my nipple to nipple distance divided by 2. My nipple to nipple distance is 8 inches divided by 2. That will be 4. Then I'm going to add 1/2 inch allowance to that. That will be 4.5. So I'll measure 4.5 like this. Then I'll roll it straight down to the waistline, and I'll also connect it to the mid armhole. Like this. At this side of the line, I'm going to take 1/2 inch darts. Then at this side, I'm going to take 2 inches. I'll roll it straight to the under bust like this, and also like this. Then from the under bust, I'll connect it to the nipple point. Then at this other side, I'll use the cuff part of the ruler to connect it back to the nipple point. So the next thing I'm going to do now, I'll come to the mid armhole. I'll measure 2 inches downward, like this. Then I will connect it back to the nipple point. Then I'm going to be coming outside the armhole by 2 inches, come out by 2 inches this way. Then I'll continue the dart to that point. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to finish this armhole. Just use the inner part of the cuff to finish your armhole like this. So our dart is ready. So the next thing you're going to do now is to replace your dart, and then you add your seam allowance. The dart I have on this chest line is 1/2 inch. I will replace the 1/2 inch. Then I'll input my seam allowance. Then I'll come to the waistline. I'll measure the darts. Here I have 2.5. I'll replace the 2.5. Then I'll also add my seam allowance. Then I'll connect these points together. So So my waist length in front here is 17 inches and I'm going to be using 16 at the back. So I'll come to the side seam, I'll go up by 1 this way, then I'll connect it back to the dart leg. So our pattern is ready. The next thing we are going to do now is to input our neckline. So the neckline is having a bishop collar, so I'm going to be using 3.5 for the width of the neckline, and then the depth of the neckline in front I will also use 3.5. Then I will connect the points together. So my main fabric is folded into 2, and as you can see, I've also fused it with my interfacing. So don't forget, you're going to be notching your under bust. So I'll be cutting out wording to pad the bust area. So this is the front. We're still going to be putting our yoke later on, but that will be when we are done joining these panels together. And I've cut out wording that we're going to be using to pad it. So we'll be cutting out the back. And I'll also mark my zip allowance. I'm using 1.5 inch for my zip allowance. Measure our length measurement, the length of my armhole, my waist length. I'm using 16 inches for my waist length, and then 1/2 inch for the seam allowance. Then I will extend the lines. What I'm going to do now is to input my measurements. On the guideline, I'm going to input my shoulder measurements divided by 2. I'll rule it to the chest line. Once here, from this line, I'm going to measure 3 inches so that I can slant the shoulder. Measure 1 inch downward from the shoulder tip. I'll connect the points together. I'll add my 1/2 inch seam allowance to the shoulder. I'm going to finish the armhole this way. So the next thing now is to input our circumference measurements. On the chest line, I'm going to input my bust circumference measurements divided by 4. Then I'll add my seam allowance. Then I'll come to the waistline. I will input my waist circumference measurements divided by 4 inches. Then I'll add my seam allowance. Then I'm going to be inputting that. So I'm going to add 1 inch for that purpose. Then I'm going to connect these points together this way. Our dart, you measure your nipple to nipple distance divided by 2. My nipple to nipple is 8 inches divided by 2, that will be 4. Then I'll rule it to the chest line. So I'll take 1/2 inch dart on both sides of the line. 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch. Don't forget your dart will stop 1 inch before it gets to the chest line when you are sewing it. Then the next thing now is to slant the zip allowance part. So on the waistline, I'll go in by 1/2 inch. Then I'll blend it back this way. So for the neck width, I'm going to be using 3.5, just as we use in front. So from this line, I will measure 3.5. Then I'm going to use 1 inch for the neck depth. So it's going to have a yoke. So from the neckline, you come in by 1 inch inward like this. Can you see? Then you are going to be connecting this point to your chest line like this. So this part is going to be your yoke. So this is it. This part is going to be the yoke. We are going to be cutting this part with the white fabric, and we're going to be adding seam allowance to the yoke part. So this is how it says. So when I'm cutting out now, I'll cut from here. I'll stop here and cut on my armhole this way. All right. So this is it. This part is the yoke. We are going to be adding seam allowance to this bottom part when we are cutting it out on the white. So this is how the back is looking. Don't forget to notch your zip allowance. You're also going to notch your dart legs. So I fold my Ankara fabric into two. So I'll place this yoke on top of it like this. You can see that this is the way it is. So this part you're going to be adding your seam allowance to this part. So I'll add seam allowance of 1 inch to this part. So I'm going to be sewing it with ½ inch. This is cutting, doesn't stretch, so I'm adding 1 inch seam allowance like this. So this is it. I added 1 inch allowance to this part. You can see this is how it's going to look. By the time you are done joining, everything will balance well.
I will also cut out the yoke for the lining also. So you can select to have your yoke on only the main fabric. So when you are shocking, just shock directly on the main fabric and use it to cut out your lining. Then after that, you can now plot your yoke on the main fabric only,
instead of cutting it like the way I'm cutting now.
So I'm doing mine like this because it's a tutorial, and you can see I shock directly on my lining because it's a tutorial. I want us to have a clearer view of what I'm doing, so that's why I shocked on my lining. And yeah, so you can select to shock yours directly on your main fabric and plot your yoke on only your main fabric instead of on both the lining and the fabric like I'm doing here. All right.
Don't forget to notch this part so that you will know that this is the part that is going to be connected to the rest of the bodice. So it's going to look like this. This is the lining. This is the main fabric. So don't forget to put notching like I said. If not, you are going to mix it together. Can you see? So I'll be cutting out my sleeve. So from the top I'll measure my cap height and then the length of my sleeve. I'm going to be doing 10 inches for the length of the sleeve and then my seam allowance. Then I'll extend the lines. So on my cap height line, I'm going to input my armhole measurement with my seam allowance, and I'll get my cuff this way. Then I'll come to the hem line of the sleeve. I'll input my round sleeve measurement with my seam allowance. Then I'll connect it this way. Then I'll cut it out. Then the sleeve is ready. Don't forget to notch these parts. So this is our sleeve. We have not put the yoke in the front pattern because we need to join the panels together first. These panels together.
So make sure you watch till the end so that you can see how I'm going to do that.
So this is the back. So you'll be joining the yoke to it. Can you see? Match them on top of each other, right side to right side, and then you're going to join together with ½ inch allowance. Can you see that your armhole is back to shape? Perfect. Your neckline too is back to shape. So the next thing now is to sew in your darts. Repeat the same thing on the lining. So I'll work on the skirt part of the back. So first you sew in your dart. The length of your dart is 6 inches from the waistline. Measure 6 inches downward from the waistline, and that's the length of your dart. So we already know the position of the dart, so I'll sew accordingly. So this is our skirt part. This is the lower part. You're going to be joining it with the upper part now with 1/2 inch allowance. So match them together like this. So you're going to be joining together on the waistline with 1/2 inch allowance. Do the same thing here. You match them together right side to right side, and then you join together with 1/2 inch allowance. The same thing goes to this side, and you will also repeat the same step to the lining. I'm done joining it together at the waistline. To match the lining together with it, right side to right side. Then you match together at the hem line. You stitch together. When you are done, you drag them up and match it with the side seam and close the side seam, and also you close the zip allowance part. You also repeat it here as well. So when you are done joining it together at the bottom part, you drag the lining upward to match together at the armhole side like this. Then you close the side seam. You also drag it up to meet with the neckline here. You also close the zip allowance part. You are not going to turn the neckline, but if you are not doing collar on the neckline, you can turn the neckline also. So this is the back. Can you see? This is the back. So from the wrong side, this is how it looks. Can you see? So the next thing you do now is to match them together, right side to right side. Then from the waistline, you measure 9 inches downward, and from that 9 inches, you are going to be sewing it together with your zip allowance. So I added 1.5 zip allowance, and I've already used 1/2 inch to turn the lining, so meaning it's remaining 1. So my zip allowance is remaining 1. So from that point, I will measure 1 inch inward, and I will sew it all the way to where I want my slit to be. I would like to have just a little slit, 6 inches slit. So my slit will be here. So I'll measure 1 inch. Then from here, I'll sew it to this point. Then when we are done fixing the sleeve and the collar, we are going to be attaching our zipper. So this is my slits. So I'll top stitch here.
So the back is ready. I'm going to be working on the front now.
So I'm going to be joining them together now. So place them on top of each other, right side to right side, and stitch with 1/2 inch allowance. So you're going to repeat the same thing to the lining part. After ironing it, this is how it looks. So this is it after ironing it. And from the wrong side, this is how it's looking. Can you see? So I've opened my seam allowance and I've put another stitch on top of it so that it will keep it from closing back. So the next thing now is to create our yoke. All right, so from the neckline I'll measure 1 inch downward and I'll slant it to the armhole. So fold it into 2 so that it can be equal on both sides. So this is the front, this is the center front, this is the neckline. So from the neckline you go down by 1 inch this way, like this. Then from this 1 inch you are going to slant it to the side seam. Make sure you align it properly. So from the neckline, slant it to the armhole. You can slant it to the mid armhole, the way I'm showing you here. Then you're going to cut it out. And then you're going to be replacing this cutout with the white material. So this is the yoke. Place it into 2 folds. And then you place the yoke on top of it. Then you are going to be adding your seam allowance, adding your 1 inch seam allowance to only this part. So I've cut it out and this is how it's looking. So remove the yoke now. So you take to the sewing machine and you're going to be joining the neckline to get, you're going to be joining it together with 1/2 inch seam allowance. We have 2, you can see this is 2 here. So you're going to be attaching it together here this way. Can you see? So I'll go ahead, I'll do that. You don't have to cut yoke for the lining, it's not necessary, like I did at the back. I'm going to be leaving the lining of the front the way it is. We're not going to be cutting any yoke for the lining. This is the lining. You're going to be leaving it the way it is. You're not going to be attaching any yoke to it. So the lining remain the same. So I'll take to the sewing machine now. I'll join with 1/2 inch. So I'll join together with 1/2 inch allowance. It's looking very fine. I really love it. Can you see? This is how it's. So this is it. You can see we have attached our yoke. So the next thing you do now is to attach this upper part to the lower part. So you match them together, right side to right side, and then you're going to join together with 1/2 inch allowance. When you're joining, make sure you flip your lining out of the way. Then when you're done with the main dress, you also attach lining to lining also. Attach lining to lining. So I'm done attaching them together. I'll also join lining to lining. See, this is the lining. This is the waistline of the lining. So match them together as well and join together. So this is it. I'm done. So the next thing now is for you to turn it to the wrong side so that you can also stitch the side seam together. So you stitch the side seam together also. Assuming you're not doing collar for the neckline, you also turn the neckline, but I'm attaching collar to the neckline. I won't be doing that. So this is the front. So the next thing now is for us to join back and front together at the shoulder. So match them on top of each other, right side to right side, and then you are going to be joining together at the shoulder. So see the way it is, just place it on place. This is the front, so place the back on top of it this way. Then use the lining part of the back to wrap it round this way, and then you're going to make your stitch. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to attach my sleeve, but first you will have to hem the bottom part of your sleeve. So the next thing now is to close the side of our dress. So we are done attaching the zipper. The zipper runs from the beginning of the collar all the way down to this point. Then this is it in front. Can you see? So the next thing now is to turn your dress to the wrong side, and then you're going to close the side of your dress. So I'm going to confirm my measurement. So starting from the center of the dress, starting from the center of the zip this way, you measure on the chest line your bust circumference measurement divided by 4 minus half. You put it there. On the waistline, you put your waist circumference measurement divided by 4. At the hip line, you input your hip measurement divided by 4. Then you connect the points together. You also do the same thing to the second side. Then I'll take to the sewing machine. I'll follow the short line, and that will be all for the. And that's the end of the class for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Please kindly take a moment to subscribe to this channel if you have not subscribed, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. I love you. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye.